Today's book is Speaking by Martin Bygate. I think I'm pronouncing that right. Bygate? No, it's got to be Bygate. So, quick disclaimer. I've gotten some feedback in some of the comments for my previous book reviews that people are getting annoyed that they're hoping to come to these book reviews to get useful information about the book. And I'm spending a lot of time talking about my subjective impressions, how easy I found it to read, how much I enjoyed it, that kind of thing. I would hate for anyone to waste their time, so let me forewarn you, I'm going to spend a lot of time talking about my subjective impressions about this book. In part because I'm having a hard time kind of coming up with concrete stuff I took away from this, but I do have a lot of thoughts about the formatting and the style and stuff like that. So, forewarned. First of all, what is this book? It's a book for English as a second language teachers. It's part of a series of a scheme for teacher education in which I release a whole bunch of books on various skills, and then speaking is one of the skills. This book is recommended for the Delta. It's on the list that Cambridge publishes for the Delta recommended reading list. As I'm hoping to do the Delta in the near future, I decided to read this book. Also, we've got a book club at work, a book club for professional development, where about kind of 5 of us English language teachers choose a book to read, kind of read it, and then come back and discuss. And we thought this one looked interesting. This book has, I'm not sure I go as far as to call it famous, but it's got a good reputation among kind of people who know their stuff, in my experience. Meeting kind of my manager who really knows his stuff, and the guy who works in product development at my school who really knows his stuff. Both of them kind of recommended this book quite highly. My manager, he did have a caveat. He said it's not a book you want to read straight through. But he said it's an essential reference book for the Delta. He said if you're doing a lesson on speaking, you really need to reference this book. And one of the reasons is, I guess, on the Delta, if you're doing a lesson on speaking, you can't just like say, okay, we're going to do speaking. You've got to break that down into various sub-skills. And this book does a very good job of kind of breaking down speaking into all the different sub-skills that make up speaking. The guy in product development kind of thought very highly of this book for the same reason. He actually told me that he had to do a workshop on getting adults to speak, kind of a teacher training. And he drew heavily on some of the information from the early chapters in this book and putting together a workshop and talking about how again, kind of similar things, all the various kind of sub-skills that go into speaking. Although he also didn't read it all the way straight through. I read it all the way straight through. And I liked some of it, but I found other parts of it frustrating. It's not badly written on a sentence level. Martin Bygate kind of can write clear sentences that are easy to understand. It's not especially interesting, but you know what do you expect? It's a textbook for teacher training. Parts of it are interesting, actually. I take that back a little bit. What got me about this book, a few things, but one of the things that got me about this book is there's so many tasks in it. Maybe this is a good example here. This is just kind of a page here. This is page 31 and 32. And you can see there's task 30 and task 31. So there's just so many tasks on the page. And the tasks will kind of give you like a reflection question. Like, okay, I'll just read this out. In what ways, task 31, in what ways can non-native speakers be A, insufficiently explicit, B, too explicit? In what ways can this occur with native speakers speaking to non-native speakers? In each case, which do you think may be the greater problem, A or B? In your opinion, what is the reason for this? Now, the answers are seldom given, almost never given after the task. So they're just meant to be kind of a chance for you to kind of stop and reflect. And ideally, if you were doing every task, I think this kind of would help you to consolidate the information a bit more. Ideally. But who has time to do every task? There are. In this short book, this book is only, not counting the glossary and the bibliography and the index and all that stuff, this book is only 114 pages of text. Actually, it's less than that if you take into account kind of blank pages in between sections and stuff like that. I don't know, it's about 110 pages of text, in which there's 114 tasks. So, there's several tasks in each page, and it's just almost impossible to make any sort of time on this book. We do a book a month for this book club, right? So we're on a month is generous for a book like this, granted, but you want to keep moving. So during my lunch break, I'll bring this book with me to the coffee shop, hope to get 30 minutes of reading done, and I'm not gonna stop and do like 15 minutes on every task. You just can't make progress that way. So I just read through the task and I'm like, next, and then the next task, okay, next. But it's just, I don't know, it's just hard. The task really kind of killed the momentum of the book. You read a little bit of information and then think about these questions, and a little bit more information and then think about these questions. And then some of it is just all tasks. Like chapter 11. You have a whole bunch of kind of data of learner language, like second language learners who are learning English as a second language. Some transcriptions from some of their speaking tasks. And then, what do you think about this language data? What features does it illustrate? What ways does it show this? What ways does it show that? And it's just, I don't know. I wish he would have just told me what the key points that he wanted me to know. Because, yeah, as you're reading this through, you just can't make any progress on all these kind of tasks. It's like a workbook, but no answers in the back. If there were answers in the back, I would have actually maybe thought this was a little bit more useful. Although, some of these don't have concrete answers. They're just kind of reflection things. We were talking about this in my book club, and there are about 5 of this in the book club, 5 people. And yeah, basically everyone had the same reaction to it, kind of frustrated with all these tasks that just kind of made it impossible to get kind of any forward momentum while you were reading. But one guy said, this would have been perfect if we had a year to read this book, and we could have like reflected on all this stuff. And yeah, he's got a point. Although, I think he was saying that this book was kind of meant to be used for a course, where you kind of read a little bit, come into class and discuss it. Read a little bit, come into class and discuss it. And I think he's right. It probably is made to be used on a teacher training course rather than just kind of reading at home. The other thing is, I think this book would be ideal for teacher trainers who need to do workshops. So like you want to do a workshop on something, you take a couple pages out of this book and you've got the tasks already there to have your teachers kind of talk through the tasks, and then you give some feedback and stuff like that. So I think for teacher trainers this book is ideal, but it's just hard to read by yourself. And yeah, now that I've read it, I actually read this thing twice, because I read it once right for the book club. And then I was going to do this book review, and then I thought, I don't really remember anything from this book. So I read it again, and I'm still having trouble kind of remembering stuff or organizing stuff. And I think, I don't know, some of that's maybe on me. Maybe I've got a terrible memory. But I think there are some parts about the book's organization that just kind of make it hard to remember concrete information out of this. One is those tasks, like I was saying before. It's just a whole bunch of questions, and if you're not sitting down and doing the questions, you get to the end of the chapter, and it's difficult to say what you've taken away from it. The other thing is just kind of the formatting of it. I mean, I think when you're reading a textbook, a good thing to do is to just kind of look at the headings to try and organize the information in advance. You wouldn't do that for pleasure reading, but for textbooks, that's a good way to kind of try and organize and remember the material. But, you know, look at this heading here. It's got, okay, the introduction, and then a heading here, that's good. And then task, 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 task. And then like another subheading. So, you know, as you're trying to kind of skim through the book to try and get like an idea of what the information you want to take away with, most of these pages, the only thing you see in bold are the tasks. It just kind of makes it very hard to keep the organization of the book or of the chapter in mind as you're reading it. The other thing is, so once he gets into kind of the section 2, he's talking about the methodology of oral interaction. Now, one of the frustrating things about the field of second language learning is nobody agrees on anything. So you spend all this time reading and you're not really learning anything concrete. You're like, okay, well, this person thinks this, and this person thinks this, and this person thinks this. You know, unfortunately, it's a field where it's very heavy on conflicting theories and maybe not as solid as we would want it to be on kind of cold, hard data, or at least that's the impression you get from reading a lot of these introductory textbooks. So what he does, I think really what he has to do here is just kind of list the different views. So he's got, first of all, he's got Rivers and Timperley's views of the different skills involved in speaking. And they divide it into 3 categories: skill getting, which includes cognition and production, and skill using, which is interaction. And then he contrasts that with Littlewood's view, who's got kind of a binary division between pre-communicative activities and communicative activities. And then these are divided further into structural activities and quasi-communicative activities. So, yeah, that's interesting, but, you know, I don't know. You read it and you're like, okay, well, this person thinks that, and this person thinks this, and they're both interesting ideas. We were talking about this at the book club, and again, other people had the same opinion as me in this case. It was balanced, but it wasn't particularly interesting. You almost kind of wish for something that's got a little bit more of an editorial edge on it. You know, somebody who says, no, 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 this is how you do it. And kind of makes a strong case for kind of one particular view. Now, to be fair, that's not the book Martin Bygate is trying to read. Martin Bygate is trying to read a book that kind of brings together these different views. But it would have been almost more interesting to kind of read a book where somebody is kind of more forcefully arguing for a view, and maybe that would have stuck in the mind a little bit more than just kind of these conflicting views. And then he gets to the interaction activities. And he's got like interaction activities Littlewood. So these are interaction activities that go back to Littlewood's kind of view of speaking. And then interaction activities Harmer, I don't think Harmer was in the previous chapter. I just kind of slipped that in. And then interaction activities, rivers and temporally. So these kind of go back to the methodologies which were outlined in the previous chapter, but I don't know. I was like, okay, what did Littlewood believe again? I had to flip back to that. I would have preferred it if it would have been integrated a little bit more. Like, this is Littlewood's view. These are the activities that go with it. Rather than having the methodology in one chapter and then the activities that go with the respective methodologies kind of all mixed together in the next chapter. There are tons of ideas for activities in here. If you're using this as a reference book, I think you could get a lot of good ideas for a speaking lesson in here as a reference book. So again, I can totally understand why if you're on the Delta, and I hope to be doing the Delta in the near future, you can kind of pick out, oh, right, this would be a good activity for that lesson, or yeah, I'll use this activity. But when you're reading it straight through, it's just really boring. So, you know, here's an example. 9.4, interaction activities, rivers and temporally. We have already seen that rivers and temporally present an inventory of 14 categories of use, which they consider learners need to be able to handle if they are to develop autonomous interaction skills. This was in the previous chapter. They also provide a list of sample activities, which would lead to the language described by the categories of use. And then we go to the sample activities, and it's just a list. So number 1, establishing and maintaining social relations. There's short dialogues based on small situations. Answering the door, making a telephone call, giving birthday greetings, interacting at a party, welcoming visitors, customers. That must mean welcoming visitors, comma, customers. 2, expressing reactions. Situations requiring reactions to a TV show, photographic or painting exhibition or slideshow. Number 3, hiding one's intentions. Students given a mission to carry out must not reveal it under any provocation. And it just kind of goes through a list of 14 points. And it's boring. And then you get to the interaction activities of so Penny So, and it's just another list. Brainstorming activities, guessing games, guess the object, profession, countries. Clue, first sound or letter in a piece of mime, strange picture, a puzzle clue. Finding connections between incongruous prompts, verbal or pictorial. Yeah. Now, to be fair, again, as a reference book for preparing a speaking lesson, I think you could get a lot of good ideas out of here. Although, it's just ideas. It's not, he's not giving you full lessons here. So the hard work of developing these ideas into lessons is on the teacher. But you know, that's what teachers do, right? They make lessons. So there are some ideas in here that I might try out in my own classes. A lot of his ideas, though, or not his ideas, a lot of the ideas that he surveys, a surprising popular thing that pops up again and again and again is some sort of picture description, like order the pictures in a story, or spot the difference between two pictures, or, you know, here's an example he gives here. Have to tell a story to their partner. So, yeah. Anything that revolves around making a picture, I'm going to have a hard time with because I can't draw. So, you know, those are all those ideas right out the window, although I'm sure I could find it somewhere. So, yeah, then he goes through a bunch of ideas. Then he gets to Chapter 11, where it's just a bunch of learner speech. And he's got, the learners are describing a picture. And so you've got to read through what the learner is saying. So, Group A, this is a second language learner describing a picture. So he says, okay, in this picture, in picture number 1, I can see a little girl who probably is inside her house, who is playing with a bear. This bear, it has a brown color, and the little girl is sitting in the stairs of her house. This house is very nice. It has rugs. It has brown rugs. It has wastebasket. It has a basket who probably... and it just goes on. And you don't even see the picture they're describing. Now, I understand that for linguists, this kind of data of learner speech is invaluable, and they go through and they pick up all the things that second language learners are doing with the language. But to just have chunks of this to read is just boring. And then the questions kind of, oh, did you notice this about it? Kind of come afterwards. And I thought, no, that's backwards. Give me the questions first. Tell me what to look out for, so I have a reason to focus in on something. So I'm just kind of not reading these long paragraphs about second language learners describing a picture. And then, you know, it was so hard to keep focused on this book. My eyes kept glazing over as I was reading it. I just had to keep going back and rereading, and you know, you get to the end of the page and you're like, oh, that was so boring, I wasn't paying attention to any of it. And then he gets to some interesting stuff in chapter 12 about different teaching techniques. Talks about here there's a present, drill, and practice in context, you know, kind of the PPP, I guess. But then he says, but there are also alternative techniques where you can let them communicate as far as they can with the language they have. Then when communication breaks down, then you give them the language that they need to complete whatever task that they're doing. And then you kind of will drill that language if necessary, and you're just kind of, you're paying attention to where they need the language to kind of teach that. And then he's got this idea here by Willis and Willis, Dave Willis and Jane Willis, which is practice, rehearse, perform. I think this is kind of similar to task-based learning. I just read Jane Willis's book on a framework for task-based learning previously. So then the format of this series, I guess, this series of books, is that the last few chapters are about kind of, you know, the data to support. And I was kind of thinking, oh, right, finally, you know, instead of just these theories, we're going to get some cold, hard data on what the research shows about what the best way to teach is and stuff like that. But it's just a series of suggestions on how the teacher can collect data with a whole bunch of tasks. And it's interesting, but like, who's going to do this? I mean, teachers are already overworked and underpaid, right? So I'm reading this, I'm like, yep, not going to do that. Okay, not going to do that. Not going to do that. Same thing with chapter 14, largely the same. Just a bunch of tasks about collecting data. Yeah, so... yeah, I had some frustrations with this book. I've kind of skipped over the main part of the book, which is kind of the first section here, section 1, Understanding Speaking, in which he talks a lot about kind of all the various sub-skills that go into speaking. Now, of course, as native speakers, we just talk without thinking about it. You know, you don't even think about all the things that need to come together to make a correct sentence, right? You need to have your grammar. You need to have your vocabulary. You need to have your articulation, right? I need to know how to form all these words with my tongue and with my mouth. You need to have your intonation and your rhythm. You need to have kind of a sense of the listener. For example, right now, I'm talking into the camera. So I don't know who is listening to this and what their background knowledge is. So I've got to kind of make all sorts of assumptions, and there's no way that anyone listening to this is going to be able to ask me questions to clarify what I mean. So I have to kind of try to preempt any kind of breakdowns in communication by assuming and kind of speaking clearly. I know I'm doing a terrible job of that, by the way. Sorry, I just speak terribly. So there is kind of a lot of interesting stuff about how he breaks that down, and he also kind of breaks stuff down like turn taking, negotiation of meaning, negotiation turns, management of interaction, turn taking, agenda, explicitness, facilitation, production, compensation skills, grammar, vocabulary, pronunciation. So he does a nice job of kind of breaking it all down. I thought at times the first part was being a little bit pedantic, like he was taking stuff that everybody knew and he was just kind of being explicit about it and labeling it. But, I guess that's what you do in a book like this. I was wondering if it was just me, but then somebody at my book club had the same reaction. They said, I thought he was just kind of, like when he talked about the difference between speaking skills and kind of real-time production. He's like, I thought that was a little bit silly that I had to explain it. Like, doesn't everyone know that? And I'm like, does everyone know that? I don't know. I've been reading so many of these books lately. Maybe I'm forgetting what's common knowledge and kind of what I've kind of picked up from previous books. Because I do remember actually the first kind of couple books I read on linguistics being kind of like, whoa, I never thought about that. All the different things that go into like language. I'm past that point now. I've been kind of doing a lot of professional development reading for the past 10 years. So some of this basic stuff no longer impresses me, but that's not Martin Bygate's fault. He doesn't know my background reading. So the first few chapters there is some very basic stuff, but there's also some interesting stuff in there. Talks about the difference between knowledge and skill. He makes a comparison with driving. Which is a comparison I think I've heard in several other linguistic books, but it's made me an apt comparison. You can theoretically have all the knowledge of how to drive, but actually having the skill of driving in real time is something that you've got to proceduralize that knowledge, kind of get that knowledge into practice. So he talks about how language learners also have to do that. It's not just enough to know the grammar and vocabulary. They've got to proceduralize it to be able to speak in real time. And of course, speaking isn't just grammar and vocabulary. It's all the other things that go into it. Knowing conversation routines. There were some interesting things in here that I had been in some other books I've also previously read. So didn't impress me quite as much because I had previously read them, but they were interesting nonetheless. It talks about how speaking, kind of by necessity, we speak in very short, simple sentences because we are processing what we're saying as we're thinking. But also the listener has to hear it while we're talking, and we can't overload the listener with too much grammatical complexity in a sentence. This was something that Dave Willis and Scott Thornberry had talked about in previous books I read, so it wasn't my first time encountering that, but it was interesting. A few other things like that, which I think Michael Lewis talked about, our kind of reliance on kind of set phrases when we speak. This was kind of something he brought up here as well. I'm out of time. Sorry, my 30 minutes are up, so I'm going to have to stop the video here.